Welcome to Closer Look, a podcast where our pastoral team at Charis City Church takes a deeper dive into the topics we're exploring together as a church. Join us as we unpack the truths of Scripture and consider how to apply them to our everyday lives. For more resources and information, visit us at chariscity.com. Welcome to week 3 of Charis City's podcast called Closer Look, where each week we'll be diving deeper into Sunday's sermon. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, and I serve as our Creative and Connections pastor here. I'm joined by our lead pastor, Nathan Rymer, and associate pastor, Chris Halbach. This Sunday, we wrapped up our series, Kings and Kingdoms, where we were exploring the intersection of faith and politics. Nathan, your takeaway point of unity over uniformity really stuck in my brain. And I know early in your sermon, you kind of illustrated that point with the Spartan army as an example of unity. So what parallels do you see really between their military cohesion and the kind of unity the modern church needs?
You know, like I said on Sunday, there's a lot not to admire about the Spartans. I mean, they obviously put very little value on human life, and they were very violent. So I don't want certainly to appear that I'm holding up the Spartan society as the goal for the church generally, but they do have something really amazing, or did have, the idea of unity. I mean, that army was completely different than other armies at that time, where you know, generally it was just big mass of people that rushed together, and there were heroes fighting single battles, and how many wins you had versus the other side. And the Spartan army would line up in perfect rows and columns and interlock their shields and have their spears out in front. You know, the first 3 rows of spears would extend out beyond the shields, and then they'd just run in perfect unison towards the other army, and then just collide with the other army as this big wall of spears. And so you see some things that we can take away from that. One is obviously training. I mean, they were incredibly trained. You don't do that without thousands of hours of work together. And so obviously that parallels to us on making sure we're understanding the Bible, making sure that we understand what the key issues for the church are, and being committed to the same purpose. And so I think that's one. And I think they were driven. They trained and trained and trained, and their entire lives, quite frankly, were built around the military. And that's who they were. And if you look at the parallel between that and what we should be as followers of Jesus, our entire lives should be revolve around Jesus and his mission. And so I think that probably is 2 good ones. I don't know, Chris, you got another thought on that?
Yeah, well, you've talked about it a little bit, but I think it's interesting, and I love the movie 300 because if you're a man, I don't know how you don't love that movie. Gerard Butler is like the man's man. But one thing that I like they highlighted,
that's the Spartan army.
Yeah, and what I love they highlight in that is that they train from a very, very young age, like basically from the minute they can hold a weapon, they're training, and I think that's another really good thing for us. Like if you want to promote and practice unity, it doesn't start when you're 18 or 25 or 30. Like it starts from a very young age. And I think that's a good thing for us to remember, that, these are ideals and practices that we should be working on and instilling in our children and in younger generations, so that, we're not trying to play catch up later in life. I think that makes a big difference.
That's actually a thought on like the way we think about student ministry on Sunday mornings. Yep. We get a lot of people that will ask us, why don't we have programming on Sunday mornings for junior high and high school?
Right.
And the reason for that is we want to teach them what it looks like to be a part of the church earlier. And we really have found, and I think more and more people that write about student ministry are starting to say, that this whole idea of pulling them out and focusing solely on them on Sunday mornings rather than letting them be part of the church really doesn't prepare them to go off to be young adults somewhere where now nobody is, has different programming, and suddenly for the first time they've got to interact and figure out what they do as part of the church. And so I think that even leads to that idea that we need to train earlier what it looks like to be part of the church rather than to be this focused on group that is separate and apart from the church on Sunday mornings.
Yeah. And even with that, I love, and I know that a lot of our people love seeing our students serving in the ways that we see them serve on Sundays too. And when they're not serving, being engaged in our worship service as well. It's always super awesome to see that. Nathan, you mentioned that unity isn't found in uniformity of opinions or life situations. Can you elaborate on how a church can maintain unity while embracing diversity?
I think keeping the focus on Jesus and on who he is and what he's done. I think one of the mistakes that churches are making right now is we want to do self-help sermons. We want to do political sermons. We want to do make your community better sermons. And those are okay in the context of what the Bible says. But we are not self-help gurus. We are not psychologists. We are not a lot of things that are good and are necessary. But we are here to preach the Word of God. And the more we focus in on what the Bible says, and particularly who Jesus is, what he's done, and how do we respond to that, I think the more we're going to find that unity. I think we actually encourage dissension of opinion when we start taking political opinions as a church. Because what are you doing? Now in your community groups, you're talking about, am I conservative or am I liberal? And that's not what we're about. We're about the gospel and about spreading the gospel and the mission of God.
Yeah, I think I want to say we touched on this the first week of the podcast a little bit, but I think it's a good reminder for us that we need to be excited about the gospel. And I think one thing churches can do to really help that. I think when it's our focus, consistently, and I think when we do our best to make it exciting, I think that changes things. Because if it ever gets to a place where, and we talked about this even with communion because we do it every week, right? If we ever get to a place where it's commonplace and just feels like something we do every single Sunday just for the sake of doing it, it loses a lot of its weight and its meaning behind it. I think the same thing's true for the gospel. If all we ever do is just go, well, we got to talk about it every single time, and it's church, we got to hit on it. Jesus loves you. We get it. I think it becomes another one of those things where like, we get it, we understand it, move on, get to the stuff we really want to know about. It's like the thing that we really should be focused on absolutely is the fact that Jesus, God himself, came to earth as a man, lived a perfect life, died as the ultimate sacrifice, and rose from the grave 3 days later. Like if that is not the core behind everything we do, if that's not the thing that excites us, if it's not the thing that motivates us, if it's not the thing that drives the mission, I think we've lost it entirely as what it means to be the church of Jesus Christ.
I had a professor, I guess a guest speaker that came into my preaching class in seminary, and he said it this way. He said, it's a sin to make the gospel boring.
Yeah.
He said the gospel is too important to make it boring. And so as a preacher, do everything you can to make it engaging because we have this perfect product, right?
Yeah.
Jesus. And it's our job to not mess that up.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me that we should be excited about it and we should tell it in creative ways. We have this perfect, timeless, unchanging truth. But that doesn't keep us from using different technology and different ways to tell that story in a way that meets people where they are right now.
Yeah. I think something else too, something you talked about in the sermon this week, I loved. If you want people to understand that you can have unity and diversity, show it. And I do love that you even talked about, from the perspective of staff that not as much at this point, but I mean, in past, we've had staff members that did not vote the same way we did and didn't always have the same political opinions. And we talked about the idea that we have to be unified in what really matters in Jesus. And I love that because I think there can be a tendency if with leadership to want to be like, we're all the exact same. We think the same way. We live the same way. We act the same way. We vote the same way. And I think showing people that there is a difference and that there is still unity and ultimately the mission, I think makes a big difference.
I think it's so important for churches to know what the core issues are. I call them the closed-fisted issues that we have to have agreement on. What are the things that we need to have agreement on from a leadership perspective? And then what are the things that we can disagree about? And those obvious choices are, what movies we like and all that. We don't have to agree on that stuff. But there's even biblical concepts that we don't have to agree on. I'll give you a great example. I mean, I've read about churches that have split over their views on the book of Revelation and whether you're, amillennial or premillennial and, splitting up over whether you're a post-trib church or whatever. That's crazy. None of us really know whether amillennialism or premillennialism is right. And we certainly don't know if it's a mid-trib, pre-trib, or even if there is a rapture.
Yeah.
And so when we divide up and we get angry at one another over things like that, that just doesn't make sense. Who Jesus is, that's and how do we respond? That's those core issues.
Yeah, I mean, I know just in my own experience. I mean, I've been through a couple of different churches where we had issues that would come up like that, and I remember a discussion in particular I had with somebody. I'm not going to get into all the details of what the theology was we were discussing, but I remember getting to a point with him, and I was like, man, he's like, can I just be honest with you for a second? He's like, yeah, of course. I was like, this really doesn't matter to me all that much. And he's like, what do you mean? How could it not matter to you? I said, let me ask you a question. I said, does the way you feel about this change the way you present the gospel? Are you making disciples? And he goes, well, yeah. And I said, okay, then we can disagree. It's okay. Like, ultimately, I don't think I'm going to get to heaven, and that's going to be the first question God asks me. I think what he's really going to be, care about the most is, hey, are you a follower of Jesus Christ? It's like, well, yeah, I got that down, and it's like, okay, if we can get that down, we can have disagreements on things. And I do. I think there are things that are very important, that churches should be unified on. And I think it's important. I know we've talked about it a lot. Like, there are things in our church that you want the staff to be unified on that aren't necessarily our close-fisted issues, but it's important that we align in that.
I'll give you a great example with Sean. I'm going to pick on, I think we picked on Sean, our worship pastor and student pastor every week, even though he's
necessary.
Not in here.
That's what he gets for being a student pastor.
That's right. He should be here. If he were in the room, we might not pick. Well, we still would.
It'd be worse.
Yeah, we would. But he has more of an Assemblies of God background,
Mm-hmm.
and when we brought him on staff, some of those things that are a little more charismatic, I said, I don't have a problem with you believing those things, because those are areas where you can look at the Bible and come away with two different concepts.
Yeah.
Is speaking in tongues something that was limited to the early church? And what I believe that it was a tool that God used to allow people to communicate, like on the day of Pentecost, that no matter what language you spoke, you could understand Peter preaching on the day of Pentecost. Or was it something that has carried forward and is still, a part of the church today? I believe that it's not. Having said that, I can't say for certain when I look at the Bible that I'm right about that. I could get to heaven and find out I was wrong. But we need to have, our teaching needs to be unified.
Yep.
And so what I told Sean is, I don't have a problem with you having those thought processes, but we've got to be unified. We're not going to do those things on Sunday morning because that's not what we believe as a church. Does that make sense? That's one of those examples of where I look at the Bible and I see both sides of that.
Yeah.
I think I'm right, but I won't be shocked if I get to heaven and it turns out I wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and I love one of the things that you did. I remember this all the way back in Sean's interview in that, because he was like, well, what do I do if someone asks me about that? And he's like, I don't want to lie to him. It's like, no, you don't have to lie. You are perfectly capable of saying, look, this is where I fall in this, but here's what we do as a church and what we believe and practice as Charis City, and I think that makes a difference. And I think the other side of this, though, is, things that are more opinions and convictions. I think churches get really caught up in what I call personal convictions over what really is, true doctrine. And again, I'm not going to have to get into the semantics of all the different examples of that, but, I think one of the things that churches have to be really careful about is not drawing hard lines in the sand about things that you can pull Bible verses and go, see, here's where it is. It's like, that's great. And if you want to practice that, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But, don't pull that one scripture and be like, this is a command from God the way it is. It's like, okay, if you believe that that's necessary for you, by all means, live it out. And I think we've talked about it on the stage. I know from perspectives of things, the way people dress, even down to things like alcohol. Like we know that drunkenness is a sin. That's clear-cut biblical issue. But, whether or not a Christian should drink alcohol, personal conviction. And there are, there's obviously things that go with that, who you're around in the moment and whether it it's stumbling or not. But, I know one of the things that we've said from the stage before is just be careful that you don't let your personal convictions, become judgment towards others when they don't follow the same things you do.
Well, I mean, I think guardrails are good. And those are, that's what I typically call it. And I didn't make that up. I think Andy Stanley certainly made that popular. I don't know.
I guess
he
we'll
made
give
it
him
up.
credit.
Yeah, I don't know that he made it up or not, but he is the person that had a big platform that started calling those guardrails, and I think that's a great description. The idea of a guardrail is that it's inside sin, just like a guardrail going around a curve isn't at the danger zone; it's just inside the danger zone. It keeps you from getting to the danger zone where, and so a guardrail for us would be something short of sin that we draw the line at, so that we don't approach that that danger zone of sin. And obviously that works in dating relationships. What's our guardrail? I mean, what is that going to look like when we're alone? Drinking is the same way. And somebody's guardrail may be I don't drink anything.
Yeah.
Somebody else's may be I drink one or I drink two. And those are fine as guardrails. In fact, they're good. We want to be committed. We
Yeah.
want to be, we don't want to see how close we can get to sin, but not quite get there. We want to live strong lives. So guardrails are good. The guardrails become bad and they become legalism when I get upset at you that you're not following my guardrail.
Right.
If that makes sense. If I don't drink at all, great. But if I get upset at you because you have a drink, that's where guardrails become legalism. And that's where it goes from being a good thing to a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned that it's common for Christians to try to put Jesus on our side, specifically on our side of an opinion. And so what are some practical ways church leaders can help their congregation avoid this tendency?
I think one easy way is to build up and encourage other churches. Occasionally, and we probably don't do it as often as we should, we'll pray for other churches.
Yeah.
We meet in a building of a church that is a different denomination than us.
Yeah.
And we pray for those guys regularly. And I want those guys to succeed and because they are furthering the kingdom, because we agree on what I call the core issues. We disagree on some other things, but that's okay. And I think that's one way, because I think even with church, we start to think the way we do it is the right way. And if you don't do it that way, you're doing it the wrong way. And certainly, if you're not preaching who Jesus is, how do we respond to Jesus, and how do we live a Christian life biblically, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But outside of those things, we can encourage, we can pray for, we can root for other churches, even that do things a little differently than we do, or think about some of those secondary issues differently than we think about them. So I think that's one way. I think just also recognizing that seeing the best in people, I guess is the way to say that. I think so often we get to a place where we think somebody that doesn't vote the way we do is not upholding the Christian ideals.
Yeah.
And that person would look at it and think, you're not upholding the Christian ideals. And I'll be honest, I have really strong political opinions, and I definitely believe that we should be involved, and I tend to vote in a particular way. But that doesn't mean that the person that votes different than me is wrong. It just means we have a different perspective, and just a recognition that you can be right about an issue and be wrong in the way you approach it. And I think that's really the thing that we have to understand as Christians, is that the way we treat people is way more important than how we vote. I do think God cares how we vote. I think, we should pray about how we vote and those kinds of things. But I think if we are voting the right way, whatever that is, you want to call it, voting the right way, and we are treating the people that don't vote like us poorly, we'd be better off voting the opposite way and treating people well.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's core fruit of the Spirit that talk about this. I don't know how you take peace and gentleness as fruit of the Spirit and think that doesn't apply to areas like political opinions and differences in the church. And because I always do, I love that Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers," right? Because it's not about us trying to maintain, a certain unity in opinions, but really ultimately, if you're a peacemaker, it means that in all situations, and Paul talks about this too, in all situations, we're to get along with people. And in the church in particular, we're not just called to get along, like we're called to be a family. And that means that in those situations where people are different, we have to be willing to be the bridge, even if they're not. And I think that's an important thing too, is if the people on the other side of it are hostile at you, you're not hostile back. What did Jesus say? If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And, and I think along with that, gentleness falls directly into that. How we approach these situations matters. And I think I love that you talked about that on Sunday, that, how we handle and approach people that do vote differently than us is important. And I think that goes back to love, which was my other one. We always talk about love being grace and truth. The truth is important. We can be right about it, and we need to share that truth. But ultimately, we lead with the grace of Jesus and understand that, sometimes we're going to be right and wrong about specific things. Other times we just have differing opinions, and we need to handle those, those approaches in the best way.
I heard someone say the other day that Jesus was as pleasant and hospitable as he could be and convey the truth he needed to convey.
Mm.
And I think there's a couple important things that you hear in that. Jesus was willing to say tough things.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to be willing to say tough things, but we have to be as loving and pleasant and hospitable as we can possibly be and still accomplish the mission.
Yeah.
We don't shy away from the mission because we want to be nice, but at the same time, we think about what is the least offensive way we can accomplish the mission.
Yeah. Well, and you and I've talked about that even just in the ways that we preach, that if we're going to offend somebody, we're going to offend them with the truth of God's word, not with the way we worded something.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to remember with that. Yeah. I mean, I think there are points where the word of God, it will be divisive, it will be contentious, and to some people it will be offensive. And I mean, that's scriptural, and so we could, I think our challenge in that is do the best with what we can in the same scenario. I think, yeah, absolutely make peace where we can, but we still share the truth. And I think if we do that, will we inevitably offend some people? Yes, but will we ultimately, be on the right side of it? I think, yeah.
I love Daniel, and we started this series out with Daniel chapter 2, and I think it's Daniel chapter 4. I think with Daniel in the lion's den, and I think about Daniel in the way he handled the new proclamation from the new king. He's trying to get everybody on the same page, so he says, and his advisors are trying to get to Daniel. They're trying to find a way to tear Daniel down because he's incredibly successful and he is loved by the king. And so they come up with this idea that for 30 days you can't pray to anybody or worship anybody but the king. I think it was Darius, if I'm remembering correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong on which king it was. There were 3, but and Daniel doesn't throw a fit. He doesn't go protest to the king. He doesn't, make a big scene, but he goes and he prays. I think the Bible says, it does say it this way. It says that he prayed 3 times a day in his window, just like before. Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful picture of what Christianity looks like when society around us is not in agreement with what we believe. Mm-hmm. We don't go out of our way to, throw a fit. We don't post hateful things on Facebook, but we live how we're going to live, and we set an example for how to live. And Daniel does that, and what happens with the king? King becomes a believer, because when Daniel comes out of the lion's den, he goes, okay, that Daniel believes something that matters. And I think we're called to live as Christians in such a way that it forces people to take the gospel seriously.
Yeah. Well, you said something that I want to touch on. You said he believes something that matters. So let me ask this for you to answer, and then we can share our thoughts on it too. How would you encourage people to differentiate between what they believe that matters and what they believe that ultimately, I don't want to say doesn't matter, but maybe I'll word it like this better. What beliefs would you say are the core issues? And I'll let you talk about what we believe are our core issues. And what would you say if somebody has a belief, what should distinguish whether that belief causes them to lose friends, family, things like that? Like what Jesus talks about. Because I think there are some things that people hold onto so tightly that they do lose friendships and they do lose family members over it and things. So does that question make sense? Like
it kind of does.
Differentiating between what we believe that matters in the sense of what we're holding to no matter what versus the things that are important to us, but ultimately are the things that we can back off. They're not as quite in your face, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let me answer it a different way, because when I hear core issues, I think of those closed-fisted issues of who Jesus is, what he's done, and how we respond. And those are the things that as a church that we can't back down on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But let me give you, we've talked about drinking. Let's use that as an example of, I think it is great for Christians to have standards by which they live and guardrails by which they live, and to be passionate about those. But the difference between somebody that sits out at a dinner when everybody orders a drink and they just order iced tea, and the person that makes a comment about why they do it and makes everybody feel a little uncomfortable, that would be the difference. Does that make sense? That person is, I would not tell you to change your convictions because you're in a different crowd. I don't think Jesus did that. I think that Jesus lived the same way, whether he was with his apostles or whether he was with the tax collectors and sinners. Yeah. But he certainly never, there's no indication that he ever made the tax collectors and sinners uncomfortable. They loved him. I mean, the Bible's very clear that sinners loved Jesus. They loved hanging out with him because he loved them and liked being around them. And I think the same is true for us in that sense. I think it's less about how we do it, or it's more about how we do it and less about what we do. I'll give you an example. You know, my family has a tendency, we typically pray before every meal. And that just what we do that, whether we're at home, whether we're in a restaurant, that is the way we do those things. And, you know, when we went to some Muslim countries in the past, it's a very different deal because we are saying a prayer to, you know, obviously to Jesus in a Muslim area. And we continued to pray because to do anything different would be letting fear affect how we live for Jesus. But at the same point, we prayed quietly. We didn't want to offend anyone else. Does that make sense? Because we knew it might make people uncomfortable. It was not our goal to make people uncomfortable. It was our goal to live in a way that we believe we're called to live. And to me, that's what I would say. It's more about how you do it than what you do. Because I would certainly not say that you do things differently depending on what crowd you're with. To me, that becomes feels a little like we're, you know, our culture is affecting our Christianity, and it shouldn't. But I think there's a difference between living out those things that you hold as important and making people feel wrong or uncomfortable because they don't do the exact same thing you do. Yeah. I don't know that I answered.
So my question that my brain could not formulate for me was essentially, how would you encourage Christians to live out beliefs that matter but aren't essential? I think is what I was trying to get at. There are things that we believe that matter and are essential, and things that we believe that matter to us but aren't essential. And I think that answers.
Candidly, I believe it's almost the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I certainly believe that obviously Jesus is God, that he died on the cross, that he rose on the third day, that our sins are forgiven. And I need to tell people about that, but I don't need to be offensive about that.
Yeah.
I don't need to, you know, I mean, I'm amazed sometimes when I see posts from Christians on Facebook that are just so in your face of, if you don't believe this, you know, and those are true statements.
Yeah.
But I think Facebook is not the right place to have that conversation. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And I think
definitely not with the tone that it comes with sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and there's nothing wrong. I mean, I put stuff that, you know, on Facebook and Instagram that are certainly church oriented and Jesus oriented, but I try to hold back on very controversial topics that are true from social media because you can't explain them. You can't tell the heart behind it. You know, the pulpit or having a cup of coffee is the place to say, hey, you know, we do believe that what you decide about Jesus determines where you spend eternity.
Yeah.
I generally don't post that on Facebook because you can't explain the heart of that. You can't. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
it does. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that really does answer the question. Because I mean, for me, my side of this is, I think if you have personal convictions, I think you need to live them out to the fullest. If they're going to be convictions and you want to stand on it, stand on it. But yeah, don't expect other people to live up to your convictions and don't make people feel bad.
Don't be a jerk about it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because you can, you can be living out the convictions of Jesus, but if you're a jerk about it, that's not how Jesus did it.
Right.
Well, and I had, you know, a pastor in my life one time, I won't say who he was, but I remember, you know, he had his personal conviction. He didn't drink. And you know, I commend that. But anytime alcohol was brought up, you know, he was like, "Oh, I don't drink, and here's all the reasons I don't do it." You know, and it was every single time, and sometimes even to be like, "Yeah, if you do, you know, I think that's really bad." It's like, hey, like I understand your reasoning behind it, but you know, your heart behind what you're saying, I would just, you know, be careful to, you know, not to offend somebody because you have this personal belief.
Not all personal convictions are corporate, you know, convictions.
Yeah, and particularly where they're not called out in the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, you asked me the first week, and it was a great question. How do we know what biblical topics are and non-biblical topics? And I said, look at what the Bible says.
Yeah.
I mean, and the Bible is very clear. And I don't want this to make this a drinking conversation, but about that issue of alcohol, drunkenness is a sin. Addiction to alcohol is a sin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But having a drink is not. And Jesus turned water into wine. And if that was bad, Jesus wouldn't have done it. And so it's okay to have guardrails. We should have guardrails. But make sure guardrails don't become reasons that we are treating other people poorly. And we don't live out the attitude of Jesus in humility.
Yeah. Well, I would say too, in terms of promoting healthy diversity, kind of go back what we said earlier, don't be afraid to practice your convictions. If that's what you believe, then you don't have to conform. If you genuinely feel that strongly about it, don't feel pressured into changing it. If it's a core issue, we're going to pressure you on that one. If we're talking about Jesus and who he is and how we respond. But if we're talking tattoos, the way you dress, all the other different things, you can go down the list. Like if that's how you feel about it, live that out. I know people that will still to this day walk into a church where the pastor will get on stage in a t-shirt and jeans, and they're going to wear their blazer every single Sunday because they believe it is reverence and that to them matters, and
that's
that,
beautiful.
Yeah. And to that I say, I love that, and I think that goes into even bigger things that are more divisive in the church. If you believe on that, stand on it. And a church that is living out healthy diversity will back you on that. I'll tell you an example of one of my things that happened to me. Before I went on staff at the church in Georgia I worked at, I attended a Presbyterian church for, I think it was about 6 or 7 months. And I do not hold to all of their beliefs. I don't hold to every doctrine that Reformed theology has. And in fact, I disagree with a lot of them. But I love what the church did. I loved everything about the mission. They were a multicultural, multi-generational church. I loved their pastor. And so I went through their entire membership process. It was 3 months long, and it ended with, I had a conversation with an elder, and they would sit me down with the elder, and so they were like, hey, we want to talk to you about what we believe and all that. And I was like, okay. And I was like, so I'm going to tell you something straight up off the bat. It's like, I am not Reformed. I was like, so I want you to understand that, I was like, that being said, I love everything you do. I believe in the mission of your church. And if you're okay with it, I would love to attend here knowing that we disagree on that. And, the elder told me, he said, hey, we love that you're here. He said, all I ask is you give me a chance to tell you our side of it and explain what we believe. He said, and that's it. And I was there. I was a member of that church until I moved to work at the church that I left. And, and I love that example of that, the example that we don't have to look alike. We don't have to come from the same backgrounds. We don't have to believe everything the exact same way. As long as we believe what really matters, it goes back to Sunday. I mean, I think unity in Jesus, trumps everything. And I love that.
I think a lot of that has to be like us being willing to show grace on those type of things too, especially in the beginning. I know something that a pastor that I worked under, shout out Mark Bird from First Ridgeland, he used to say it all the time, that we shouldn't assume the worst about somebody, but believe the best. And so that was like a core mission that he would drive to the staff all the time. And so I think that I think especially in those issues that we do come up, especially the personal convictions, obviously, like, we should live those personal convictions for ourselves out as much as we can. But those things that aren't biblical core issues are not things that we have to impose on the others. And honestly, if it's something that you do believe and you do live that out faithfully, and people ask for why you do that, I think that's a great opportunity for you to present the biblical truth that you see in the way that you see it applied to your own life.
And if we run people off because they're not thinking the way we want them to think or acting the way we want them to act as a general rule, we don't get to share the good news of Jesus with them. We don't get to share the truth so they can hear the different perspective of why they should think differently, why they should live differently. I've heard it said that, the way we should think about people integrating in church is with the 3 B's, that they should belong, believe, and then behave. But so often churches flip those, and you have to behave and believe, and then you belong.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work because we run people off because they don't feel a part of what we're doing because they're not behaving the way we expect them to behave. And the reality is non-Christians aren't going to behave the way the Bible says. Why would they? They're not believing what we're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. Let's be real clear. If Jesus didn't die on the cross and rise again on the 3rd day, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here on Sunday. I'd be at a football game. There are things that I could do to enjoy this life in a different way if this isn't real. And Paul even says that in the Bible. But because it is real, because Jesus did die and rise again, that changes everything.
Yeah.
And until you believe that, why would we expect you to live that out? You know, I say this pretty regularly. I say the guy that is cheating on his wife and cheating on his taxes and a bad dude at work and all of those different things, who's not a Christian, he's not going to hell because he's a bad dude. He's going to hell because he doesn't know Jesus.
Yeah.
Same thing about the guy that is an awesome husband and father, does everything right at work, treats everybody the way that a Christian would treat them, but he doesn't know Jesus. He's got the same problem.
Yeah.
It's not how they're behaving. It's their lack of belief in the King.
Yeah.
And so we need to be more concerned about culturally sharing the good news of Jesus and the love and message so that they can follow Jesus. And then as a church, we talk about obedience because we're to that point. We behave because we believe.
Yeah.
And we get those, I think churches get those out of orders. They want you to behave even before you start believing. I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you have things that are very important to you, even as a church, one of the things that we're passionate about is baptism by immersion. You know, that we obviously have had people in our church who did not follow that 100%. We had people that were baptized in different ways at different points in their life. And, you know, one of the things that I love is watching someone who is so dogmatic on the other side of it, who's like, I will never be baptized like that. I was baptized this way. And, you know, and watching and going, hey, that's fine. We're happy you're here. But can we tell you why we do it this way? And you do it over and the same thing. They'll come back around to it. It'll come up in a sermon. Hey, I'm never going to do that. It's like, that's fine. Can I tell you why we do it this way? We do it over and over again. And I mean, even since I've been here, we've probably baptized 2 or 3 people that, you know, that were that way. And it's always a really neat experience to watch them, you know, and there's a joy in that. And I think what I love about that is it lives out that unity despite diversity, different beliefs, different opinions, different convictions. That's okay. And yeah, different behaviors. If your church doesn't, and I'll let you, because I want you to talk. If your church does not have people who behave differently than the Bible, you're probably doing church wrong.
Yeah. We should be attracting people here that we can share the gospel with.
Yeah.
Over my ministry, I'm going to guess that I've baptized at least 50 people that come from a background where they were sprinkled as an infant. And some of them have been pretty easy to convince that, you know, that the Bible calls us to obedience through baptism by immersion. And some of them have been very difficult, and you know, it's taken them years to do that.
And that's my story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine took me till I was well into college, you know, raised in the Catholic
You were
tradition.
saved,
And then
what, 16?
I was,
I think
yeah, I was
like
saved,
Protestant. I mean,
yeah, I was saved probably 16, 17, but I mean, I was, you know, sprinkled, baptized as an infant. And yeah, that's something I struggled with theologically I wrestled with that for probably 3 years.
And I get it, because it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an important tradition that's built in. But I will say this, I've said this to everybody I think or close to it that I've baptized that comes from that tradition. And I've said, I've never had somebody be, you know, after they come up out of the water go, it was, you know, I got wet. That's about all I felt. I said, there's something about obedience that is a special feeling. And I've yet to have somebody that I baptized that came from one of those traditions come out of the water and go, you were wrong, preacher. It didn't affect me at all.
Yeah.
Generally, everybody comes out of the water and is like, that was special.
Yeah. When the same thing's true for people that don't follow Jesus at all,
Yeah.
you know, that come to know him. I remember my baptism vividly. And I mean, I was a picture of people getting me to church when I did not belong there, quote unquote. You know, I mean, I wasn't like the worst dude in the world, you know, but I absolutely lived a life that was completely counter to Christ. And I've told the story, you know, at church before, but I had 2 of my best friends that, I mean, just were relentless at sharing the gospel with me. And Gaddy, one of my best friends, you know, he was the guy that was like, you're going to church with me. And I was like, I'm not going to church. I don't have a ride. He goes, no, we're here at your house right now. Get in the car. You know, and they dragged me
at its finest.
Yeah. You know, and they dragged me basically to a student conference in the the winter of 2011, and that being at that event was where I ended up giving my life to Christ. And I remember they were like, "You're gonna get baptized?" I'm like, "Let's do it," And so that Sunday morning, I got baptized, and there is something about that you never forget. And what I love is getting to see that same feeling in other people when they come out of the water. And, and I whether it's because they are being baptized for the first time and they've been following Jesus for 30 years, whether it's, they were baptized as an infant, now they're being baptized, or if they're being baptized for the first time because they've decided to follow Jesus. I think, again, it's just, that is a picture of unity. It's, we all come from different places to get there.
Yeah.
But we all go through the same change. And I love that.
One God, one baptism, one faith, those are the things that unifies.
Yeah. It's true. Nathan, you mentioned having strong political opinions while maintaining close relationships with Christians who vote differently. Can you kind of share specific strategies for building these bridges among believers?
Recognizing that love and grace trump being right about an issue. And I said this a little bit earlier, but you can be absolutely right about some issue and be absolutely wrong. I think about, and I'm going to pick on, there's, I'm not going to even call the church out, but you've probably seen them on social media or something. They're not anywhere near here, but they're always picketing something and holding up really hate-filled signs.
Gotcha.
Y'all know the church.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, they're not in the Houston area.
They're not.
But they make the news all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I just go, oh, I wish that was not the picture of Christianity that people see on the news.
Mm.
I agree with them on most of the positions they are taking.
Yeah.
That church, I mean, when they are picketing, I agree with their position, but I strongly disagree with the way they're doing it.
Mm.
And so that's what I would say is we need to have personal convictions. We need to teach truth, even secondary truth. That's part of the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But we need to do it in a way where we lead with love and then we share truth. And that's one, to have the attitude of Jesus, but it also is the most effective way to see change in somebody to that truth. You're way more able to share truth with somebody that trusts you than somebody that doesn't.
Yeah.
If I talk very differently to people that I have a relationship with, my kids. I'm much more direct with my kids about how to live than I am somebody I happen to be sitting by on an airplane, because I have a different relationship. I have a different credibility. And so if we start with why they're wrong, they're going to bow up and get upset, and they're never going to hear the truth in a way that might change their thought process.
Be a real awkward plane ride.
Yeah, be a real awkward plane. Yeah. But if we lead with love, we lead with grace, and then we share that same truth, we're much more likely to have a real conversation that might actually change something.
Yeah.
And so that's what Jesus loved people that strongly disagreed with him. He hung out with them. I mean, he did. And he tried to ultimately change who they were. But even when they didn't change their opinion, he still loved them. I mean, I think about the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
I like to think that the rich young ruler went off and had second thoughts somewhere. But it says when, Jesus, challenged him, he went away sad. He didn't change his opinion. And the reality is, Jesus loved that rich young ruler right where he was, with all his faults and pride and all of those things. He loved him right where he was. And I would say the same thing for us is love people for who they are, not what they think about a particular issue.
Mm-hmm. You want to share some thoughts on this?
I was going to say, I think that leading with love could definitely help, especially, we've got the holidays coming up, and the holidays, man, why do they always have to follow election season? I don't know who came up with that calendar cycle, but thanks. But yeah, I think leading with love, you talked about it throughout a lot of the series, both of you did, about how our political platform has to be love as Christians, and how, I said it earlier about the not assuming the worst in someone, because I think that's what we usually tend to do, is we tell ourselves that our position is so right that anything outside of our right position is absolute wrong and we should hate it. And so by proxy, we almost hate that person who has that opinion. And so I think that part of it has to, like I said earlier, we have to be willing to share the grace that we have been so lavished on. Because if we think that we're completely right about everything, and everything, like you said, I think you said it our first week, is if Jesus aligns with every single thing you've ever thought and every opinion that you have right now, you're probably not reading the truth of Scripture correctly. Because, like you said, yeah, the Scripture is a two-way sword. It cuts forward, it comes back. So there's a certain level of grace that we have to be willing to give people, because we're also in need of that same grace.
Yeah.
And so I think that, leading with love first, and realizing that just because someone has a differing opinion doesn't mean that they are absolutely, out to hate the Christian faith even, or some that have different positions, are Christians and still have that position. I think that we have to be careful to completely, throw out the baby with the bathwater, and think that everything about everything they do is hateful and terrible, and realize that, God created that person, formed that person. Jesus went to the cross to save that person. And so they are is in need of as much grace as we are, and Jesus loves them unconditionally. And I think that if we remember, I think it's easy for us to stop seeing people as souls, and easy for us to see them as positions, or even, what have you, see them as just a formation of opinion rather than a soul created by God. And so I think that if we have that soul forward mentality, I think it can help us to remember that, if Jesus went to the lengths that he did to show that person his love and grace, how much more worthy are they of me to show them that love and grace?
I'll tell you something else that I think is good to remember is the Scripture that our fight is not against flesh and blood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a tendency to want to fight the people that hold those opinions,
mm-hmm.
rather than the spiritual darkness that causes it.
Yeah.
And just take the worst possible example. Some, Satanist who screams obscenities about Jesus, says everything we hate is, talking about, loving, killing babies, whatever. You make it as bad as you can make it.
Mm-hmm.
He is not our enemy.
Right.
The spiritual darkness behind that is our enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And we can love that person despite the fact that we disagree with essentially everything they stand for,
mm-hmm.
when we remember that Jesus died to save them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that the problem is not that person, that they're really a victim. If you want to get right down to it, they're not the evil. They're a victim of evil.
Mm.
And the evil is really where our battle is. And that's with the forces of spiritual darkness.
Yeah. Well, and when you fight that with love, and again, I think love gets a bad connotation sometimes because people take it to mean inaction, grace and truth. Keep that in mind at all times when you talk about love.
Mm.
When we were in college, there's this event that they used to do in the city of Jackson called Fonder's First Tuesdays. And we used to go out to it, and there was a guy that was notorious for standing on the street corner because it was right next to an abortion clinic. And, he would scream. Just God hates murderers, God, just signs. And you can think about the angriest dude sharing the gospel. It was him. And I remember one of the first times we ever went to Fonder's First Tuesdays, there was a patio on the side, and I remember somebody yelling out, they were like, "Hail Satan!" back at this guy, and just going back and forth, and initially, like, I didn't really want to say anything, but we made the decision. We walked up to him, and I remember saying something along the lines of just like, "Hey, I just want you to know this is not Christianity, and I hope you know that Jesus loves you." And that, instant mood change from that person. They went from aggressive and offensive to, "Hey, we're just messing with that guy. I really appreciate what you said." And it gave us an opportunity in that moment to share the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
because we dispelled all this. We were peacemakers, and said, "Hey, we're gonna meet hate with love," and when we did, that changes that. And I think the same thing does apply to our friendships and relationships with people that differ. And I'll tell you one thing that, and I've talked about this, I think, one of the episodes before. Not just how you talk matters, I would say when you talk matters about things. One of the things that anybody that knows me, again, knows this is not a shocker. I'm a talker. If you give me air and space, I will fill it. I'm really good at that. And one of the
even
things,
if you don't give him air and space,
Yeah,
I'll still fill it. Yeah. I'm loud and
he
aggressive.
just talks quieter because he can't get enough air to talk loud.
And one of the things that I've learned over,
That's going to sound great on the podcast, by the way.
Yeah, with
As
no
I mimic
context.
with no context. Just, here's Chris without air. Go
it's
ahead.
gonna really pick up the bass in his voice when he did that too. One of the things that I've learned over, I guess that's about 9 years in ministry now, I think, is the wisdom of silence. Solomon talks in Proverbs. He said the fool is the talker, right? The fool is the one that has many words, and I think there is some truth in that, even in these instances of. I think you would be shocked at what you can learn about somebody, and even learn sometimes their reasoning behind what they believe by just stopping talking and listening. I know for me, I've got some friends even here at the church that I have learned a lot about what they believe and why they believe it and why they vote a certain way or why they do certain things, by just giving them space and just letting them talk and letting them process. And then that gives me an opportunity to have a better understanding of where they come from, which then allows me to meet them where they're at better than me just making assumptions and jumping at it. And I think that's one thing I would say, if you're somebody who wants to better engage and have unity with people who differ from you, listen to them. I think Jesus did a lot of talking, but Jesus also did a lot of listening. He asked a lot of questions for multiple reasons. Sometimes it was to disarm a situation, sometimes to insert his authority in the moment, but he also did it just to hear what people would say. And I love that he does that even knowing what they were going to say to begin with, but I think it does, if nothing else, set the example for us that, if you really want to get down to and help change people's hearts and ultimately their minds, yes, it starts with the gospel, but also better understand their hearts and their minds. And I think that helps you know how to approach it.
So looking ahead, what gives you hope for the church's ability to maintain unity in an increasingly polarized world?
Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the easy out answer, but I think that's true as well. If we are focused on Jesus and his kingdom, we're going to be unified. It's when we start looking at the kingdoms of this world, and I don't just mean the government of the United States. I mean all of the different things that divide us.
Yeah.
Whether that's, our political views, whether that's our socioeconomic background, whether that's our racial diversity, whatever it is, there's lots of things that are different about us. And the more we focus on those things that are different, the more division we're going to have. I want to be careful. I think there is beauty in diversity, and I think that is important. Does that make sense? That we should celebrate diversity. We should celebrate that we look different, that we come from different backgrounds. God made all of us unique, and that is a beautiful thing, and that's the beauty of what heaven is going to look like. But in heaven, we are going to see incredible diversity of people that look different, come from different backgrounds, nationalities, all of those different things. But there is one thing that will drive heaven, and that is our relationship with Jesus. And so if we're going to bring heaven to earth and we're going to start making God's kingdom be here, that's the same thing that should drive us. And so as a church, we've got to be laser focused on the gospel. We've got to be laser focused on the mission. And I think if we are unified in the gospel and the mission, we're going to be fine. I think where we mess up as churches is we begin to lose some focus. I think, Chris, you said it not too long ago. You said that, it's gotten to where so many churches feel like preaching the gospel is kind of uncool.
Yeah.
Because it is, my goodness, we've talked about it over and over and over. And on Sunday, obviously, there was a pretty significant gospel message about who Jesus is and how we respond. And that can't change. That's got to be the primary focus of the church. And if we do that, we'll be unified.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that Paul talked about that. Paul's like, I could come at you with all the eloquent speech and all this. He's like, but what does he boast in? Is the power of Christ. And I think that's true for us. I'll tell you two things that give me hope. One, I think, is a reminder that this is nothing new for the church. Go look at Paul's letters. If nothing else, I'll tell you division has existed since the beginning of the church. But when it's met with the gospel and met with the truth of Jesus Christ, it unifies. And I think the other thing that I love, something that gives me hope for, I would say, even just American Christianity in general, is a trend in younger generations that are seeking less and less the entertainment and the fun and exciting, and seeking truth and discipleship. And I get, like, we would say, like, oh, all generations, everybody wants truth. They're going out of their way to find it. And when churches have, even in, I'm not going to get on a soapbox here about youth ministry, but when youth ministry is like, yeah, come and play games and have pizza, they're like, or you could disciple us and tell us about Jesus. And I think we're seeing a trend of moving away from entertain us and moving a trend towards disciple us. And I think if the church in general will capitalize on that and, like you said, make the gospel the mission, I think it will make a monumental difference in the church.
Yeah. I'd agree with both of you. And then I'd even go with, like you said, this doesn't take Jesus by surprise. Like everything that we're seeing, this has caught him in no way in surprise. And in no way is he done moving. In no way is he done doing awesome things. In no way is he done uniting his people. And in no way is he done growing his kingdom. And so I think that I have hope for the unity in the church the church's ability to maintain unity, because I think as long as, like you said, as long as we keep the core, as long as we, preach the truth of the gospel, I think that we will continue to see awesome things in the world, because we know that the gospel is a transformative message, and that message has not changed in all this time.
Yeah.
And so I think that if that is the forefront, if that is the mission, I think it's going to keep seeing God do big, miraculous things.
Yeah. Well, I think we can take hope in knowing this is what we're made for.
Yeah.
This is what the church exists for, that we're salt and light in a dark and bland world.
And we know the end of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that ought to give us unity too, that we know we are on the winning team. We are on Jesus's team, and we get to take a peek at the end of the story and see what's in store for us. And that should give us hope and courage and all of those things, even when things are tough, to know that the best is yet to come.
Well, that's our time for today. We hope you'll join us again next week as we dive into our next series, Dangerous Prayers. If you have any questions you'd like to see in the podcast, you can email those to me at adam@chariscity.com, and they just might make it in the mix. Thanks again for joining us for Closer Look Podcast.